Thank you everyone for joining us. Welcome to another exciting workshop on the Mandatory Mediation Directive on behalf of the Gauteng Attorneys Association, which we all know is our provincial umbrella body. We're in Local Attorneys Association, being the Johannesburg Attorneys Association, Pretoria Attorneys Association, the West Rand Legal Practitioners Association, and the Soweto Legal Fraternity all form the Gauteng Attorneys Association. I'd like to welcome you all. Thank you for joining us again in our fourth mediation workshop. As we all know, practitioners are faced with the implementation of the Practice Directive, and accordingly, this workshop is aimed at the practical implications of working through the current directive. As we're all aware, there are many development on challenges to the Practice Directive, and we shall keep all our members updated with developments as and when they transpire. My name is Yusuf Wadi. I'm the chairperson of the Gauteng Attorneys Association. I have the privilege of introducing my fellow chairpersons from the following organizations. The first of which will be the Johannesburg Attorneys Association. Mr. Azar Aziz Ismail. He's a knowledge manager at Baker McKenzie. Mr. Aziz Ismail, would you like to formally introduce yourself?
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us on behalf of the Gauteng Attorneys Association and Johannesburg Attorneys Association. Appreciate you being here and looking forward to engaging on this very important topic.
Thank you kindly. Next, I would like to formally introduce the Pretoria Attorneys Association. I'm just going to check whether Ms. Vijayta Rana has joined us. She is a director at Dalberg Attorneys. Ms. Rana, if you are present, would you like to formally introduce yourself? I think she's probably struggling to get in. I'll move on to the West Rand Legal Practitioners Association. Ms. Marianne Pretorius of Marianne Pretorius Attorneys. Mrs. Pretorius, would you kindly introduce yourself?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm sorry, but I do not have my camera is not working. I am the chairperson of the West Rand Legal Practitioners Association, and I'm looking forward to this workshop.
Thank you kindly. I'm just going to wait for Ms. Vijayta Rana to join us, and I'm sure she'll advise us as soon as she's joined the particular meeting. We have 404 participants at this moment in time, and I just want to cordially indicate that this workshop will be recorded and it will be played on YouTube. So if everyone could kindly just be careful when addressing, but I also invite everyone to make sure that under the Q&A section, you take full advantage of our wonderful guest who will then take you through the analysis.
Good day. Sorry to interject. My name is Percy Mukwena, and I'm not getting any audio from you guys. Can you please wave if you can hear me? I've been trying all I can.
Thank you. We can hear you clearly. If you don't mind switching off your audio at the moment.
Please do assist so that I can
if you could kindly switch off, Mr. McQueen, if you could kindly switch off your audio. Thank you kindly. Thank you. Apologies for the interruption. And I hope everyone has joined and has audio, etc. But please put it in the chat so that we don't disturb, especially once the workshop has started. As I was saying, we'd like to encourage all our attorneys to join the respective associations, support these particular events and other fundraising initiatives by each and every association. This is, of course, crucial for these associations to continue to serve the legal community. I'm now going to hand over to Nicolette de Wit, who will be chairing this session as well as the Q&A. Thank you kindly. Ms. Nicolette.
Thank you very much, Yusuf. I see we have quite a number of people joining us today. Thank you to everyone who has joined. I'm going to jump right in. We have little time and a lot of work to get through. So I'm going to jump right into our presentation for today. All right, so Yusuf has already gone through that part. So my presentation for today will be quite a high-level review of the mediation directive, but we've already reviewed just the content of the directive itself. So what we'll be doing today is we will be looking at it from a very practical perspective. So I do want to ask everyone, and I'm asking this because I'm seeing questions in the group that's making me believe that many people haven't read the directive yet. This directive is now, it's sort of a, I could call it a tool of the trade for lawyers practicing in Gauteng. So I do want to ask colleagues to read it, study it. If you're a director of a firm, get your attorneys and candidate attorneys to read it, study it, and start knowing it off by heart, because you need to know it to be able to work with it. Then on the second note, there are many issues in the directive which I've picked up, which raises questions. But what we want to achieve today is to look at how to exactly navigate this directive. So yes, there are going to be questions, and we are the lawyers that are going to carve out the answers to those questions along with the judiciary. I'm very glad to be able to say that the Gauteng Attorneys Association has an open line of communication with Judge President Mlambo, and he's literally invited us to come to him with anything that we feel does not work or that we feel we don't understand. So I've started highlighting one or two such issues, and I'm in the process of addressing a letter to him to deal with those issues. So part of the purpose of today will be to further highlight such issues which we may find, if something just doesn't seem to make sense, it will either figure it out here today, or we will take it up with Judge Mlambo, who is very happy to engage us and have a constructive discussions in regards to solutions to those possible challenges. Okay, so let us move on. I'm going to do a very quick overview. We will firstly be looking at the broad process flow of the mediation process. Then we'll be looking at administration of court-annexed mediation, and it's there where our three guests who are also in the meeting will be assisting us. I will be introducing them just before we give them a chance to address the group. Then we'll move over and we'll spend quite a lot of time on how to identify and choose a qualified mediator in terms of the directive, because it's actually not as simple or as easy as it might seem at first glance. We'll be looking at preparing a compliant Rule 41A notice, and also what is expected of a response to your Rule 41A notice. What to do if my opponent does not reply to my Rule 41A notice or files a reply that does not speak to wanting to actually proceeding to mediate. What to do if my opponent point blank refuses to mediate. Then we're going to touch on the mediation judge and mediator fees and costs of mediation. I'm hoping we can get to that as well. So let us get on to mediation administration. I see we have someone that's not muted. Mr. Desmond Nzipho, can you please mute yourself and switch on off your camera? Okay, so the broad process flow is, as you can see on the screen, your first step is to identify your administrator, the person or organization that will be seeing to the administration of the mediation. Your second step is to identify the mediator that you wish to appoint in the matter. Your third step would be drafting your Rule 41A notice. So you will recall that someone at some stage posted on our groups, how do I start the mediation process? And I was quite quick to say, you must file your Rule 41A notice. But remember, you must identify the administrator in your Rule 41A notice, and you cannot put there as appointed by the ADR-TG platform. We have a guest from the platform here today, and he will tell us exactly how the platform works. Well, not exactly, he'll give us a broad overview, but they cannot decide who the administrator is. You must decide and indicate it in your mediation notice. And the same applies for the mediator. So that's why the third step in the process is your Rule 41A notice. And then the fourth step is the reply, which you need to receive to that notice, which will lead to step 5, the appointment of a mediator. Thereafter, joint minute and agreement to mediate, and then the mediation itself. So let's get into the identification of an administrator. I just want to get my slideshow to move. There we go. So we have with us Ms. Marion Scher from Conflict Dynamics, and we have Michiel Bouwer from Mediation in Motion, and Mr. Shane Morrow from the ADR Technology Group. I'm going to give them an opportunity in that order to explain to us what are mediation administration services, why do we need that over and above appointing a mediator. You'll see once all three of them have spoken that you can choose which option you want to utilize in terms of mediation administration. The various options all have their own pros and cons. But at this stage, I'm going to hand over to Marion to start off to explain to us how does Conflict Dynamics render mediation administration services. Marion, over to you.
Thanks, Nicolette. Thanks for the opportunity. Conflict Dynamics has had a panel of mediators who we've administered since 2017. So we've done these processes before, and the directive has given us an opportunity to kind of extend that panel somewhat and to develop the processes that have already existed in the organization for some time. So if you're wanting to contract a mediator through us, the first point of call would probably be our website. So our Gauteng High Court mediators, who all comply with all the requirements of Addendum A of the directive, are on that website, on that page specifically, and you're able to go in and take a look at them. I don't know if I'm able to, okay, no, I'm not able to share, so that's fine. But it's conflictdynamics.co.za. Just have a look at our website. All our mediators are there, and you can get a sense of what you want initially. So if you're looking for a very, very competent mediator with a lot of experience, you'll be able to see how much experience each of them have. Often their rates are similar, you know, very experienced people's rates are higher. You'll see that their rates are there, and that's what you'll be paying for that mediator. We have case managers. So when you phone us, once you've had a look at the website, you can phone us, or you can phone us initially if you choose to do it that way, and you can give us a sense of exactly what you want, and our case managers will discuss with you kind of the intricacies of you know, the case, whether it's a complicated case, whether it's a simple case, you know, what demographics you'd like in terms of the mediator you're dealing with. If you have special language requests, you can just speak to the case manager about that. The case manager will then give you a short list of 3 probably, unless you request more or less, mediators who you and your counterparty will consider in making a decision. And we kind of feel quite strongly that if both parties buy in to the mediator will have a much greater chance of success in the matter. We will then contact that mediator, contract with that mediator, and contract with you, the parties, and do all the paperwork to do that. We'll assess whether the person is available. So all that work gets done behind the scenes. And then we will put the parties together with a mediator. with all the paperwork having been done, and then you will have the process. The mediator will liaise with the parties in terms of the detail as to when you'll meet and how you'll meet and whether it's online or in person. And if it's in person, where the venues will be. All that will take place. And at the end of the process, we will collect all the documentation related to the process and also, of course, pay the mediator. Our administrative fees are included in the mediator's costs. So you don't get charged an additional fee for that. It's all inclusive. Yeah, and then we have the additional responsibility, of course, to report to the courts at the end of the process. Well, on a quarterly basis, actually, but all the documentation will be housed with us as well. And I think that's my 3 minutes, Nicolette.
Thank you so much, Marion. I think that is it in a nutshell. Next on is Michiel Bauer from Mediation in Motion. Michiel, I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you, Nicolette, and thank you for the opportunity to address all of the GAA and JAA and associated association members. Myself being a JAA member, it's encouraging to see these initiatives and to form part of them. Mediation in Motion mediators, we've developed a robust process during which we assess the compliance of our members with the protocol and with the specific requirements. So I think the important part to mention is that not all mediators that are on the Mediation in Motion mediators panel would necessarily qualify as mediators for the purposes of court and next mediation, nor do they all necessarily want to form part of that panel. You've got mediators that have busy practices or as mediators or otherwise as lawyers or doctors or whatever profession they may be practicing in, and they might not have capacity to undertake this. But we've got a specific panel that we've developed and narrowed down. MIMM does it a little bit differently in that you've got this dual process in that you can either contact us and we will do the mediation administration on your behalf. We can assist with the appointment of a mediator. There's also the option of doing it the other way around, in that you may identify a mediator, whether by word of mouth or by going through our list or also going through the ADR technology group list. Many of our mediators also list a profile on there. And you can go through that list and identify a mediator that you perhaps might want to nominate or the parties may agree to, and then see whoever under whose auspices that particular mediator practices, and then get in touch with that particular mediation administrator. The additional component of the administrator or the members organization or the recognized mediation organization, as it's referred to in the protocol or the RMO, has that reporting requirement. That's an additional component. So you need to get in touch with an administrator, or when you get in touch directly with a mediator, the mediator then has an obligation to report back to the RMO under whose auspices he or she is practicing in order to comply with that reporting requirement. So there are a number of streams through which you can approach this. I think the important part is that the ideal is for the parties to agree on a mediator. And I can echo the sentiments of Marion in this regard, that if the parties buy in, your chances of success are so much higher. Of course, ultimately, you need to have agreement between the parties, and failing that, need to either agree that the mediator gets appointed by one of the administrators, or the matter needs to be referred to the umpire, who in terms of the protocol currently is the mediation judge that's yet to be appointed. So roughly, just or in summary, you can get in touch with Mediation in Motion mediators. You can send an email to secretariat@mimmediators.co.za, You can also go onto our website, which you'll see just above my head here. And yeah, you can go through our list of mediators and see if there's anyone that meets your requirements. You can filter it by field of practice, or go through their profiles and see if there's anybody that fits the demographics that you are looking for. And ultimately then either get in touch with that mediator or through the organization, and we can assist you and help you along with the process with having the experience that we have, and obviously knowing the mediators and what they are skilled and experienced in, so we can in that way direct you in the right direction. So the mediation administrator is there to assist you in the process, to make the process run more smoothly. If you have questions and you don't know exactly how to approach it, my advice would be to reach out to the mediation administrator of your choosing, and you know, MIMM is more than willing to assist in whatever way we can. I think that Nicolette, I can keep on talking, but
no, it's fine. Thank you, Michiel. Much appreciated.
Thanks.
Thank you. And then we have Shane Morrow from the ADR PSA platform, who I'm also going to give the floor to. Shane, are you ready for us?
I am indeed. Thank you very much,
Wonderful.
Nicolette. Thank you, everybody, for joining the session. It really is good to see so many people attend, and I think, yes, a lot of the questions you're going to be posing will be answered by us as best as possible. I share the sentiments of Marion and Michiel, and what we as the ADR Technology Group are focusing on is that we are not a mediator house or involved in mediation. We focus on being an independent administrative tool that the industry can use. And what this allows us to do is it allows us to take the compounded value that the RMOs offer and provide it in one centralized place. So on our directory of qualified mediators, which I've put into the chat function there, you'll see it in the chat function, is that you will find qualified, vetted mediators to conduct the mediation throughout this whole process. The other points that we focus on is that we've brought technology into the process. So we've designed a very unique platform that can manage all of this and automatically provide reporting back to the JP on matters that we have administered. So inside this platform, every user gets access to it, and documentation is now submitted and collated electronically. You don't need to scan PDFs or anything like that. It's now allowing you to put your documentation into the system electronically. We have a chat function so that the parties can communicate via chat as well. And it just brings the whole platform together and removes a lot of the mundane manual processes and includes a whole bunch of automation for the parties. We too, like the other two RMOs, have got an administrative team that is on call that will assist you with any questions that you have. And they will be able to guide you through the process. I've left another link on the chat function, which is where you would go to begin your process. But like the other two parties I've already mentioned, you have to comply with the initial rules and getting all your notices in place before coming through to the platform. But once you're there, it will be a very unique and a fun experience for you. And so I'm very happy to be involved. And if anybody's got any questions, my details are also always available. Nicolette, I think that's me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shane. Much appreciated. I hope that gave you guys a bit of a better insight into what the mediation administrator does for us in terms of starting the mediation process. Okay, so having done that, let's move on to the next part of our presentation, and that is just a brief summary. So you'll see, as I said on the slide, that not all registered RMOs offer mediation administration services. So that is something you must just take note of. And then, as I said there, it is our jobs as attorneys to research and determine whether the RMO or registered mediation organization of the mediator you would like to use offer mediation administration services or not. I know that many of the mediation at the RMOs who do offer mediation administration services would expect of their mediators to mediate with them administrating in order to qualify as meeting the under the auspices, and I'll get into that requirement, but to meet that under the auspices requirement. So if your mediator is with one of the mediation houses that does their own administration, just make sure that you check into that, that issue. Okay, then moving on. So there, I'm just going there in. I'm not going to go into that detail. I made a little note on private mediations, and I'll get back to them. Michiel told me today that he doesn't fully agree with me, but that's what we're here for today. So we will not always agree on everything. But the point that I'm making there is throughout the mediation directive, mention is made of private mediations. But if you look at the strict requirements, firstly, when it comes to the training of your mediator, and when it comes to the practicing under the auspices requirement for this directive and mediations done under this directive, then I personally cannot see how a private mediation will cut mustard under the circumstances. That's just my personal view. My recommendation would be that attorneys work with RMOs and with mediation administrators to make sure that the mediation process they run is one that is fully compliant with the directive, because you don't want to come at the end of a mediation process only to find out that you cannot use the report by that mediator in order to approach the court for approval that you may apply for a trial date if your matter wasn't settled. I hope that makes sense. Let's then move on. So the next thing we're going to chat about is how do I choose a mediator, and how do I know whether the mediator is indeed compliant with the requirements of the practice directive. So if you look at the protocol, paragraph 5.1.1, and you read that with Annexure A of the mediation protocol document, you will get the basket of requirements that your mediator has to meet. So this is all summarized in paragraph 5.1.1, where it reads that accredited mediators must have, in addition to the training accreditation assessment, and I'm just going to pause there. So that means their training certificate that confirms that they've done their 40 hours of mediation training under a training service provider that is fully accredited as required in the directive. So that's requirement number one. And then it says that mediator must be specifically certified by their RMO. So a training certificate alone is not enough. You must have a certification from your recognized mediation organization under whose auspices the mediator conducts the mediation process, that says that they are sufficiently skilled and experienced to conduct these court-annexed mediations. So I cannot stress enough, if a mediator can give you a training certificate only, that is not sufficient proof that they are indeed a trained mediator as envisaged by the directive. And then thirdly, protocol paragraph 5.1.1 goes on to say that that same mediator must be a registered member in good standing on the panel of qualified mediators of their particular RMO or recognized mediation organization, so that they can work within a framework of professional accountability. So that is just a quick walkthrough of the paragraph 5.1.1. So I'm going to unpack this a little more at this stage. So paragraph A of Annexure A, and I literally want to recommend that before you appoint a mediator, you check all of those boxes. There are Roman numbers 1 to Roman numbers 9 listing all of the requirements your mediator needs to comply with. So it says that their training certificate must be a certificate obtained from a mediator, a mediation training organization that is affiliated with either a South African university with internationally accepted mediation accreditation requirements or otherwise accredited by the Dispute Settlement Accreditation Council of South Africa, or DISAC for short. I've put in the link to each of these websites because I need to demonstrate something to the viewers. And now I'm not sure whether you can see this. Michiel, can one of you just come on and tell me whether you can see the this DISAC website?
You can see it, yes, Marianne.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Nicolette. So you will see on the screen, DISAC's website distinguishes between accredited service providers and accredited training courses. So we need to have an understanding of the accreditation of the training course. That is a separate thing from the accreditation of the service provider. And you can read the names of the organizations who are accredited here. Someone like the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, who is on both lists, they specialize in quantity surveying matters. So that would not apply very much to what we're doing. Let's just go back to the presentation. So that is DISAC's website, and we have a bit of time constraints, so I'm not going to take you through to each and every website, but you are able to see, let's just go on. So the next certification house is NABFAM, National Accreditation Board of Family Mediators. The directive specifically says that these mediators are specifically allowed to do family law mediation. So if a mediator is only accredited by NABFAM, they cannot do civil or commercial litigation mediation. Then there's the International Mediation Institute, or IMI. The link to their website is also there. And we've got ADRPSA, who are noted in Annexure C of the protocol, but I'm gathering that the intention is that they should also be regarded as an overarching organization that can provide this training. So the challenge to me when I was trying to find a mediator to appoint was the fact that there is no single list containing all of the mediators on this list. So there's no one single place where we as attorneys can go and have a look to see, here's the list of all the mediators. I would like that person. I want a mediator that has previous experience in RAF matters, that charges less than a certain amount, and that has so many years of experience. So there is presently no such single list. What you need to do if you want to go and find a mediator that is appropriate for your matter, you need to go through the websites of all the registered mediation organizations. What we as the GIA are in the process of doing is to put together a composite list of all of the RMOs. I see that ADRPSA have also put together that list on their website. So, and then you can go into the individual RMOs lists and see if you can find a mediator there. The GIA is busy compiling a list, like it looks more like an Excel spreadsheet that you can filter and choose the mediator you want to use from. I think that will assist the profession a lot because currently it's quite tedious to get your own list of mediators that you can actually choose from. All right, then I'm going to move on. Okay, so The third requirement, the paragraph C requirement, is that your mediator must have additional post-training competence as well. So they must have the mediation certificate, which we've now gone into. And then secondly, and I know I didn't mention that specifically, but that is the second requirement, is that your mediator must be practicing under the auspices of a registered mediation organization or RMO. That basically means that they must practice under the umbrella of this organization, and this organization must vouch for them as mediator. The directive goes on to go into a lot more detail in that regard, you know, signing a code of conduct, having a complaints procedure, etc., etc. But I just want to highlight the basic principle that you must be assured that your mediator is not out there by their lonesome, lonely selves. They must have the backing of a registered mediation organization. So if you want to see what's the requirements to be a registered mediation organization, you will go to Annexure B of the protocol document. So there you'll see there where the little flash is, I'm just making the point that if a person does not render mediation services under the auspices of an RMO, they are not permitted to mediate in terms of this mediation directive. All right, then the final requirement is an additional requirement for personal injury matters in that
Hallo Marikie.
Marikie Wenzel. Hallo Marikie.
Ja,
Wil jy
hallo.
jouself nie mute nie asseblief?
Skus?
Wil jy jouself nie mute nie? Ons is in die middel van die presentation. Ons gaan vrae vat aan die einde. All right, so paragraph D, we were saying that you must have additional experience or specific training in personal injury matters. And that is another thing that your mediation organization needs to certify you for if you want to be a mediator in terms of the directive. All right, so I've stressed previously, and I'm going to stress it again. Please forgive me, I cannot stress this enough, that both the training service provider and the registered mediation organization under whose auspices the mediator is mediating must be duly accredited. And then I've also said here, I think it's good before you choose a mediator to research their specific rate. We are going to get to mediators' costs a bit later, but some mediators charge on a daily basis for a daily mediation. Other mediators charge on an hourly rate. You, of course, as attorney, need to check whether the rate speaks to the complexity of your matter and whether that costs will be able to be carried by the matter in the end. All right, so I'm making the last note there that it is our duty as attorneys acting in these matters to make sure that you conduct a full due diligence, to make sure that the mediator that you appoint is fully compliant with the requirements of the mediation directive. Just remember that you run a very real risk of an opponent objecting to your mediation notice if the mediator you propose is not someone that complies with the requirement of the directive. Okay, and then we are going on to our real first step of in terms of the litigation process of the mediation/litigation process in terms of this mediation directive, and that would be the filing of a Rule 41A notice. Now, you will remember that practitioners have been required to file a Rule 41A notice for some time if you start a matter. So in many of the matters that you will be currently dealing with, you will already have that, I'm going to call it the old style, Rule 41A notice. So if you've already filed a Rule 41A notice, you will do the augmented, I call it the augmented, but there's another word for it, which I cannot remember now, but I'll share it with you just now. You will do that further. Amplified, thank you so much. The amplified mediation notice. So that notice has quite a long list of requirements that it must meet in order to be valid in terms of the directive. And here you need to read page 3, paragraph 4.6 of your mediation protocol to make sure that your amplified mediation notice achieves the purpose that it is supposed to achieve. So I want to warn colleagues, and the directive actually has a specific section in which it says that if you don't do proper drafting when preparing these notices, your notice will be regarded as non-compliant. So it says specifically you need to, number one, identify the mediation administrator. You cannot put in there to be appointed by ADRTG. You must name a mediation administrator. Secondly, you must name between 1 and 3 mediators and provide their particulars. It doesn't say the directive exactly what particulars you must provide, but I mean, common sense would indicate that you need to at least give the name of their registered mediation organization under whose auspices they practice. You would have to give their contact number and their email address. I think that would be the minimum details that you can give in regards to your mediator. Then it requires you to also set out the issues that are in dispute in your matter. And it's here that the real drafting comes in. You will have to go back to your last pre-trial minute if you've already done a pre-trial minute and properly list those issues in dispute. You need to identify, for example, matters that can be resolved by way of admissions. You need to properly look at your matter and list those matters that can be resolved by admissions. So this is not a notice that is drafted by a template that is done by your secretary. It requires a lawyer to look into the details of the matter and to properly draft this notice. If you do not so, you do so at your own detriment and at your client's detriment. So let's move on. Okay, so here I just distinguished, if you've done no Rule 41A notice before, you will do the usual Rule 40A notice, but incorporate into that everything that is required in terms of the directive and everything that is required in the Amplified Directive. So you will do like not the Amplified Directive, the Amplified Notice. You'll do a combined first notice that has all of these requirements having been met, and then you won't have to do an Amplified Notice. I hope that makes sense. All right. Here's all of the requirements listed that need to be addressed. So I've already said your administrator must be identified, the name and the details of 1 or more proposed mediators. I think it says between 1 and 3. I've made the point that actual drafting has to be done. Paragraph 4.8.2 of the directive speaks to the time period you can afford your opponent to respond to your notice. Obviously, where your matter is on trial in the 3rd or 4th term of 2025, and you're basically trying to mediate before the final enrollment of this trial date in order to resolve the matter so that it doesn't have to go to trial, you will only give them 5 days to respond because that's what's reasonable in the circumstances and time is of the essence. If your matter is on trial next year, my personal view is you can give them their 10 to 15 days to respond. But in the end, it's up to you to decide what you deem reasonable in that regard. All right, so then I'm making the point that if your notice does not strictly comply with the requirements of paragraph 4.6.2 of the directive, then it will be regarded as non-compliant, or it will be seen as an irregular notice, and your opponent can object to that notice. I've also added a tip here that says, so what I've done when I drafted my mediation amplified, my first amplified mediation notice, is I went and I had a look at the requirements for the replying notice as well. And I added in there and take further note that when replying to this notice, you must include the following so that there can be no misunderstanding about what your opponent needs to address when they reply to your notice. They cannot just say, yes, I agree to mediation, but they don't say whether they agree to your mediator or not. Okay, so that's what I now just said. We've now moved over to process flow step 4, the reply to the Rule 41A notice. And this is where you, if you're acting for the defendant, you have to respond to your opponent's notice. And the directive specifically says this may not be a blank refusal. So I know I have seen some response notices in which the opponent defers appointing a mediator. You would say, I agree to mediation, but I want some more time to consider the issue of a mediator. So that is also not a compliant response. There are specific issues I need to address as per those paragraphs of the directive. If the parties then cannot agree to a mediator, the rule says, or the directive says, that they may require the umpire to appoint the mediator. Now, as Michiel mentioned earlier, the umpire has not been appointed yet. So until such time as we have an umpire, the only course of action we as litigators have is to firstly write to your opponent, which is the collegial thing to do, and which I hope we all do before we run to court for assistance, is to write to your opponent and say, thank you so much for the response you've provided. It seems that you haven't responded to A, B, C, D of my notice. Can you please within 5 or 10 days respond? Then at least you've placed that on record. And if they don't respond, then you will follow the procedure in the mediation directive for non-compliant responses, which we will get into shortly. The directive also specifically provides that a mediator must be appointed within 5 days of the response to the Rule 41A having been filed. So the intention is not that the matter be kept hanging in the air. You'll see for every step there's a time limit so that the process progresses and reaches finalization as soon as possible. Okay. So here we are now with the niggly question of what do I do if my opponent doesn't respond to my Rule 41A notice? The directive specifically provides in such instances that in paragraph 4.9 of the protocol that you would seek a compelling order in the special interlocutory court. That means that you need to bring a special interlocutory application in which you ask the court for an order that would compel your opponent to provide you with a response to your amplified or basically first Rule 41A notice. And if they then do not comply with the court order, then the directive further provides in paragraph 4.9.2 that you may ask for an order that would excuse you from having not subjected the matter to mediation. You would be entitled to enroll your matter on the default judgment roll and seek an order declaring the delinquent party in contempt of the compelling order, and then further seek an order striking out the claim or the defense as the case may be and seek substantive relief on merits. Now this, you'll see there's a little asterisk on the presentation, because this is one of the issues that we wish to clarify with the judge president, because it says seek substantive relief on merits, and then I automatically would say, but what about quantum? What if my merits have been resolved previously and quantum is the only thing outstanding? So we will certainly obtain clarity from the judge president on what is meant there. But in the meantime, we are proceeding to ask for substantive relief on both merits and quantum until we have clarification. All right, and then obviously it says that you can seek costs on a punitive scale. Further in my note, just practically, I have dealt with this in one special interlocutory court application. I think we're all aware of the extent to which the special interlocutory court has already been burdened with all of these applications being brought because of some litigants not replying to these notices or not properly replying to these notices. So what I basically ask in the application that I've drafted is I would firstly ask that the other side be declared litigant that doesn't comply. Then I would ask for the order, telling them to comply and to file a compliant answer within 5 days of that particular order. And then my order reads, if they do not do that, then number one, ipso facto, the defense will be struck. Number two, you'll be excused from filing a mediation report. And number three, in the case of matters that are on the trial roll, I asked the court to make an order indicating that the matter will be finally enrolled, provided that you've met the requirements for final enrollment, in the event that your other party hasn't complied yet. I hope that is clear. So you don't need to go to the special interlocutory court 3 or 4 times. If you word your application properly and you word your prayers properly, you will be able to just make one application. So I have heard rumors, as far as this is concerned, that all judges do not approach these matters in the same manner. And when we had our meeting with JP Mlambo as the leadership of the Gauteng Attorneys Association, I mentioned that to him, and his response was, send me the judgments. So the JP wants examples of cases where judges refuse, for example, to grant an order saying that your matter should stay on the roll, etc., etc. So please, if you do encounter that, you are welcome to correspond with us at the Gauteng Attorneys Association. And that correspondence must please be, it must please go together with a copy of the court order that you are referring to, so that we can bring these matters to the attention of the Judge President. I know, and those of us that were involved with the process leading up to the publication of the directive, we all know that the JP's intention was that the special interlocutory court should provide relief and should assist people who try to mediate to maintain their trial dates and to keep their trial dates in 2025. So where that does not happen, we must take hands with the JP and work with him so that the issue of judgments that do not correlate are resolved in this manner. All right, let's move on. I see we're already almost at 2 o'clock and we want to leave sufficient time for questions and answers, so we shall soldier on. Okay, now we're at the step where we actually appoint the mediator. The mediator is appointed either by contacting the RMO, which is the recognized mediation organization, to assist you with finalizing those steps. You can also initiate the mediation process via the ADR PSA platform, which is called the TGS platform, or you can contact the mediator directly, confirm his or her appointment, and make logistical arrangements for the mediation to be convened. So it depends on whether you want to look at the nitty-gritty yourself or whether you want someone to assist you with that. I must say, as a busy litigation practitioner who already have enough on their hands, I, for one, will definitely rather make use of a mediator administrator or an RMO. The other advantage, if you have an RMO involved, is that you know that that mediator is practicing under their auspices and is therefore compliant with the requirements of the directive. So the appointment of a mediator simply ends by the mediator then accepting their appointment. And then comes the next step, which would be the joint minute and agreement to mediate. Both of those documents have to be prepared before the mediation can proceed. I'm not going to go into the detail of those documents. We simply don't have time to do it. There is a joint minute template attached to the mediation directive itself. And if you speak to a registered mediation organization, they will also be able to provide you with examples of the mediation agreement or the agreement to mediate, which the parties will then sign in order to get the mediation started. All right, so then the next step would be the mediation. And as I said, I'm not going into a lot of detail. There is something like a pre-mediation meeting, which happens before the actual mediation. That's That is what precedes the mediation, just to make sure that all of the parties are on board, everyone have proper mandates, etc., etc. But yes, on the day of the mediation, the parties get together with the mediator in order to resolve the matter. So the purpose of a mediation in the end is to come to a settlement of the matter. And there you will see then that the directive provides that the mediation must happen within 30 days after signing the joint minute. So it's again that timeline element that's being built in to keep the momentum and not to delay a matter as a result of a mediation that is being conducted. You can expressly agree otherwise in writing, but if that is not done, then your mediation should be finalized within 30 days after signing the joint minute. Your mediation ends with either a settlement agreement, which is something that is concluded right there and then at the mediation, preferably signed at the mediation. And then the directive specifically says that that mediation agreement can be made an order of court. In most instances, you will agree with me that it should be made an order of court. And that will then bring your matter to an end, hopefully. You may also only achieve a part settlement. So even if only part of the issues in dispute can be resolved, the mediation is seen as a successful mediation. And then you will also draft a settlement agreement in regards to those areas that could be resolved. And the settlement agreement will then say the remainder of the areas could not be resolved. And the mediator will then prepare a report to that extent, which you will utilize in order to apply for a trial date. The last thing which we want to avoid, but which does happen sometimes, is a deadlock on mediation. And that happens where the parties simply cannot reach agreement on anything. And then the mediation is concluded with a deadlock having occurred. The mediator will also prepare a report then indicating that these parties simply could not find one another and a deadlock had occurred. The directive does require of the mediator to indicate whether a party did not cooperate or was recalcitrant in causing the deadlock, so that a court can at a later stage take that into account in making an appropriate costs order if the matter does have to proceed to trial. Okay, and then I make the point right at the bottom about mediation advocacy training. So many attorneys, obviously, there are attorneys who are being trained to become mediators as well. But every attorney is not a mediator. And those attorneys not wanting to be mediators must still, in order to properly represent their clients at these matters and to properly advise your client in advance of what does mediation entail, you still need to equip yourself with the necessary skills and information about the mediation process. In this regard, many of the mediation training houses are presenting training on mediation advocacy. The training that I'm aware of is it's a day session and it's mostly presented over weekends. So I want to really encourage colleagues to attend that type of training so that you are equipped to be a good lawyer for your client when it comes to the management and attending mediation as well. Okay, I think we're now through the processes. I'm going to touch on a few issues. I see we literally have a few minutes left before we want to go to the Q&A. So the mediation judge and umpire is provided for in the directive, the protocol, page 9, paragraph 5.2.3. So what it basically boils down to is it says that if the parties can't agree on a mediator or administrator, or if they have failed to appoint one within 30 days after the response to the Rule 41A was filed or is due, or in the absence of any response, then the matter can be referred to the umpire. Now, the umpire will be appointed by the mediation judge. So this is a very seemingly quicker and more practical solution than taking everything to the special interlocutory court. But unfortunately, neither the mediation judge nor the umpire has been appointed yet. I am mentioning this so that if they are appointed, you remember that now you should follow this route instead of the special interlocutory route if you do not get cooperation from your opponent. All right. Then mediation fees and costs of mediation. I'm sure we're going to have quite a lot of questions about this. The first thing we should start with, or that I want to mention, is the payment of the costs is an upfront payment. The directive specifically says that the mediator's fees must be paid 10 days before the mediator. So I think practically what will happen is you will be determining in liaison with the mediator, and depending on the issues in dispute, how long of a mediation you are looking at, whether you will be mediating for half a day, for a complete day, for 2 days, how long this will take. You will make your best guesstimate of that. And then the mediator's full fee is payable 10 days in advance. Now, we've all read in the directive that the Road Accident Fund has apparently volunteered to pay an amount of 15,000 rands per mediation. We've also read that as the rule on mediation currently stands, the parties have to split the costs of mediation of the mediator 50-50. So then that begs the question, what happens if the RAF does not make payment upfront? Or if your opponent, and I don't want to single out the Road Accident Fund, if your opponent does not make payment upfront, I think realistically speaking, it will be left up to the plaintiff attorney who wants to advance the matter to advance those monies on behalf of his client. I know that is a bitter pill to swallow to many of us who feel that we simply don't have the funds to also assist with that under the prevalent circumstances where we're already assisting with medical legal expenses, etc., etc. But I can't see another way of these mediations being able to proceed. But again, I don't think I have all of the wisdom and all of the answers. So that is something that we can, as a fraternity, try to think out of the box about and try to come up with a solution. But the mediator has to be paid before the mediation. Then the rule, the directive specifically provides that after the mediation, the cost of the mediation, I'm just going to go this side and I'll move back. So after the mediation, those costs of the mediation, if the matter is not settled, would form part of your costs in the course of the matter. And those costs would then include what I've listed there, the mediation administrative fee, which is a separate fee in some instances, the professional fee of your mediator, and I'm putting them in brackets, so this would be a disbursement on your cost account in the same manner that your counsel's fee would be a disbursement on your cost account. Then the costs of the mediation in the sense of travel expenses, venue charges, etc., etc. That's another disbursement. And then also the fees payable to the legal representative for attendance at the mediation. I know this was mentioned at previous sessions, but I'm just going to mention it again to those of you who are not aware. It is preferable for you as attorneys to represent your client during these mediations and to advise them during these mediations. So, of course, you will also be charging a fee for the time spent in mediation, as you would have for the time spent in court. All right, so getting back to paragraph 5.5.4 of the protocol, it says that this should form part of the costs in the course of the action. Then it says the parties may agree to an alternative arrangement as insofar as it concerns the liability for payment of the costs of the mediation and or the mediator's professional fee. That is, of course, an alternative to the default that the cost of the mediation is borne 50-50 by the two parties. And then there's a very, very big question mark saying upfront payment of mediation fees. That's what I've just discussed, the very uncomfortable discussion around that. And then the next question is, may a mediator agree to hold over their payment until the finalization of the matter? Now, I have a view on that, and I've spoken to some of the role players in the mediation industry who agree with me, but no one has written anything or put this in writing. We must all remember that mediators subscribe to an ethical code, and something that is quite important in that ethical code is the independence of the mediator. So if your mediator isn't independent, then he should not actually be accepting the mediation. So the moment you ask your mediator to keep over payment in the same manner as is done with other role players in the litigation sphere, the mediation's payment becomes dependent on the outcome of the matter. And immediately that mediator is no longer independent, because they know that if there's no money to flow at the end of the mediation, then they will not be paid. So if you think on that, then you will come to the same conclusion as I have come to, and that is that no, unfortunately not. A mediator cannot be asked to hold over their account until the end of the matter, because that would inevitably affect and take away their independence in relation to the matter. Okay, and I think mediation fees and costs, let's see. Yeah, I've said it will be part of your party and party costs. Then if your matter should proceed to trial and another party didn't cooperate properly, a court may be asked to make a special costs order in regard to the mediation costs. And then I said, and this is my little note, that best practice would be to address the costs of the mediation in your mediation settlement agreement if you do manage to settle the matter in mediation. The whole issue of costs is one of the issues that is before the parties to mediate, when parties get together to mediate. So you can unpack all of those costs issues and address them in your mediation settlement agreement. And that is it. That brings us to the question and answers. I see it's 2:15, so we literally have 15 minutes left for this part. Yusuf, are you going to manage this part?
I'm happy to do so, but Nicolette, since you have the floor, could we just invite Vijayta to introduce herself to everyone, and then I would suggest that you continue with Q&A.
Wonderful, we'll do that. Vijayta, you're very welcome to introduce yourself as the chairperson of the Pretoria Attorneys Association.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Nicolette, and thank you, everyone, for attending. Much appreciated. As you must have just heard Nicolette say, I'm the chairperson of the Pretoria Attorneys Association, and it brings me great joy to know and see that the Gauteng Attorneys Association, together with the sister associations, which is the Johannesburg Attorneys Association, the West Rand Legal Practitioners Association, the Soweto Legal Fraternity, as well as the Pretoria Attorneys Association, bring this in to the benefit of our members. And I know this is a field that we're all trying to navigate. So thank you, Nicolette, for bringing this presentation and making us all understand the step-by-step process. But please, guys, if there's at any point you guys require any clarity, please pop Nicolette an email, or myself or Yusuf, and we're happy to assist. So thank you, everyone, for attending.
Thank you very much, Vijayta. All right, and that brings us to the Q&A. I didn't see, and there I'm going to ask my colleagues to please assist me, whether there are any questions on the chat. Whilst talking, I didn't have a chance to check the chat, but maybe if you have a question, even if you've put it on the chat, just for the sake of time, please do put up your hand and ask your question. I would love it if you could come on camera and show us who you are. Before you ask your question, just tell us, my name is so-and-so and I'm from whatever firm you are. And then we can proceed with the Q&A. I see there's someone from Ehlers Attorneys. You're welcome to come on and ask your question.
Good afternoon. Apologies. We just want to know with regards to the
Oh, there's a terrible echo on your line.
will the roles be in
Okay.
one or will they be a new role?
I literally can't hear you. Can I ask you to please sort out your echo? And in the meantime, we can give someone else a chance. There's more than one devices on, it seems, in your room. That might be causing the echo. So I'm going to give someone else a chance. I will come back to you. I'm not sure who I'm talking to at Ehlers, but we will definitely give you a chance once that echo is resolved. Is there someone else that wants to come on? If I'm not seeing your hand, you can simply just come on and ask your question, please.
Hi, this is Mrs. Skuman from ML Skuman Attorneys. Can you hear me?
I can hear you clearly. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your time. I just want to find out what are the provisions in the new directive is that the mediator can elect a venue. We've had a look at venues. The prescription for the venues are that there needs to be 2 separate consultation rooms for the parties and a mediation room, a general mediation room, and the costs associated with that is exorbitant. It seems as if mediators as an option, whether they wish to pursue the matter electronically by virtual means or in person. Is there any guidance regarding costs associated for these venues as well as alternatives that will be put in place if the mediator elects to hold the mediation in person?
I think that is where your mediation administrator will come in to assist you. I think if you reach out to them, they'll be able to provide you with assistance. I know the ADRP SA have done research on various venues. Maybe Shane, can you come in here?
Certainly, Nicolette. Yes, it has been quite a contentious topic over the last couple of weeks. So we have done a lot of research. We have not secured venues, but we're looking at landlords like Growthpoint and some of the chambers near courts to look at venues. Only once we have confirmed those contractual obligations can we publish rates and venues, unfortunately. But no, nothing at this stage I can concretely tell anybody.
Thank you for that, Shane. I do know that obviously the larger law firms will not have this issue because they do have their own venues because they are larger law firms. But I do know that councils, chambers will also be assisting. So if you have counsel involved on your matter, they will certainly be able to assist you. But I think this is one of those areas where we need to use our own entrepreneurial spirit as attorneys and see whether we can beg, borrow, steal, not steal. I'm just making a joke. So if you can find a suitable venue, because literally what we do need is a big consultation room and 2 little breakaway consultation rooms. But I'm sure if you ask around, if you ask colleagues, and because obviously we would be trying to work at venues that we are able to secure for free.
Yes. You know, one of the things that I think is imperative, and it's true, I think most law firms will be able to accommodate such a request. I think it just comes down to the viability of a location, etc. But as you said, that's where we will have guidance through the relevant departments. The last question I have before I excuse myself is pertaining to the enforcement of mediation. The rules are clear, the directive is clear, but it ends up if the other party doesn't comply with our request for mediation, let's for example say that you are against the state, you know, they rarely reply, if they ever do, to pleadings. If this is the situation, you don't succeed in getting a mediation arranged, and you go through the entire process of going through the court to enforce the mediation. It's a lengthy, tedious exercise. Is there any further guidance that can be provided to practitioners to shorten that process? I mean, the directive is time restrained. There are direct dates connected to it, but it doesn't really help us when it gets to waiting for the court, for the special court to assist us with enforcing these dates. Is there any guidance from the GAA side on that?
At this stage, unfortunately not. I think we're all in the same boat. We have this directive. We must navigate the directive in the best interests of our clients and achieve either certification so that we can proceed to get a trial date, or we must resolve the matters via mediation. And I think as we start actually, sending out our amplified Rule 41As and getting mediations up and running, because I'm not even aware of a single mediation that has to date been actually done in terms of this directive, we will better find our way. I know the Special Interlocutory Court is literally working overtime in order to allocate dates. I know that the JP and the two DJPs have put the necessary resources in place to deal with these matters, but they are queuing the matters. So because their resources has a limit at some stage, so matters that are enrolled for trial at this stage get preference. I think as soon as we are through the 2025 matters that stand to lose their dates, then we'll be dealing with the rest, but we must take it as it comes. And I think best mitigate the risk of a client not understanding or wanting to report you to the LPC by giving them information. There's a lot of articles in the news, there's interviews with JP Mlambo, etc., in which he fully explains his thinking behind implementing the directive. Equip your clients with that knowledge. Most of my clients were very excited to hear that they could maybe settle their matters sooner. And if it doesn't happen, they will be getting a sooner trial date, because that's the undertaking that we have from the judiciary. Eilish, have you sorted out your microphone issues? Can we go to you guys? Or if there's someone else that wants to come on and ask a question.
Can you hear me properly?
No, that echo is still there, unfortunately. Someone else?
Hi, my name is Keshni. Hello.
Yes, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Keshni Ramsuju. I'm from State Attorney Johannesburg.
Hi, Keshni.
I would like to, I don't want to look non-compliant, but most of my matters are with SAPS, and we're having an issue trying to resolve their constraints. They are bound by National Treasury rules, which requires any service provider to be... and then we have a situation where they are bound by delegation of powers. So in terms of mandate to settle, it's not so simple to go into a mediation, because the person attending the mediation will not be able to settle.
Yeah, and that is a requirement in terms of the directive.
Yes. So I've done a reply. Well, mine, not a reply. I've actually raised the irregular step by the attorney.
Which one?
Because they haven't...
Sorry, guys. There's someone talking. Can you mute yourself, please, people?
The microphone.
Say, yeah. I think that's the name, if I'm pronouncing it correct. Can you please mute your microphone? Sorry, Krishna, you can proceed. I'm sorry for that.
No, not a problem. Thank you. Yeah, so we're sitting with the dilemma here as to how do we want to comply. I've spoken to management at SAPS. They will comply, but we can't do so because this is legislation that is binding them insofar as their powers are concerned.
I understand what you're saying, Krishni, and I'm afraid I don't think this is the platform to address that issue. That is something that the management at the State Attorney's Office, together with the management of SAPS, must maybe take up with the Judge President to find a solution. I don't think we were able to at this meeting resolve that. Sorry for that.
No, not a problem. Thanks.
And good luck to you guys.
Thank you very much.
Anyone else that has a question?
Nicolette.
Good day. It's David Long from Braber Long Incorporated. How are you?
Fine, and you, Mr. Lond. Let me just hear what Yusuf wanted to say. I hear our chairperson.
No problem. Thank you. Thank you.
Yusuf,
Apologies. Please let him proceed, and then we'll go to 2 or 3 questions in the chat.
Thank you, Yusuf. Mr.
Thanks.
Lant, you're welcome to proceed.
Thank you very much. So just to build again on the topic of a venue being required for the purposes of undertaking these mediations. As we know, the directives do not prescribe that a physical venue needs to actually be used. And I was just hoping that my colleague who answered the question from the mediation authority could just build upon that, and that should the parties agree between themselves that for the purposes of conducting the mediation, that mediation can be held through an online platform that does have recording and transcription facilities, that would be an option for not only colleagues, but also for mediators and clients. Not only just to overcome the cost issue, but also for, representatives, mediators, etc., may not be physically able to attend at a venue as such. I.e., I want to know whether we're not going to be tied into having to physically, attend at these things.
Thank you so much for the question, Mr. Lant. The good news is that there is no recording of mediation, so you don't need a transcription or a recording facility. Remember, mediations happen in confidence. The entire mediation, what is said there, is confidential, and that confidence outlasts the mediation, meaning that if we go to court afterwards, you may not quote whatever was said in a mediation. It's one of the fundamental principles of mediating, is that it is done in confidence and without prejudice.
100%.
That having been said, there's nothing in the directive preventing parties from doing online mediations. I think the mediator is the person in control of the process once the mediation has started, and they would be the one guiding everyone as to whether the mediation should be physical or online. Online, unfortunately, does have its restrictions in terms of achieving the outcomes that you want to achieve during a mediation, but that would be left for the parties to decide with the mediator. There is no prohibition of an online mediation as per the directive, and I think it is for the very reasons that you mentioned that there is no such prohibition. I hope I've answered your question.
Thank you so much, Nicolette. I appreciate it.
Big pleasure. Yusuf, are you going to hit us with a few questions from the chat box, please?
Thank you, Nicolette. The first one is, I see from AC, which I think is Advocate Kaji. How do attorneys appoint co-mediators from different administrators? Should parties not be free to choose their mediators rather than have them appointed by administrators? What about mediators who want to be free agents and not be a member of any administrator organization? Finally, how do administrators ensure that there's an equitable distribution of work from a transformation perspective? Can I ask either Shane, Michiel, or Marianne to have a quick think about that and maybe give us some sort of answer where we can appoint co-mediators? Thank you.
Can I give a few
You put your hand up.
I think Marianne indicated that she can come in here. Marianne?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a couple of questions there. I mean, just to respond to the first question that's asked about administrators appointing, certainly in Conflict Dynamics' model, we don't appoint. The parties have to agree on who they want, and that mediator is then appointed. So the parties always have the responsibility really to choose someone that they both suit. So yeah, I don't know if any of the other administrators appoint. I think appointment only happens if the parties cannot agree. And then there are usually, in our instance, if the parties cannot agree on a mediator, then they would list their preference and we would choose the mediator who comes at the top of both the lists of both the parties. So we really try and ensure that parties get someone who they trust and who they can work with. In terms of co-mediation, Co-mediation has been suggested as a way of kind of building the cohort of mediators who are available. There are other options as well. There's a mentoring program that we're starting to pull new mediators in so that we can build the cohort. But again, co-mediation will happen with mediators who are not fully able to mediate on their own yet. So they're still working towards achieving the requirements that the directive has set. So those experience requirements. And that's when people will first observe, then co-mediate, and also be mentored into being able to handle the mediations on them on their own. And that is part of the transformation requirement, which the directive also mentions. So it's important to build a transformed community of mediators, and that's how all RMOs should be going about it, I would expect, in order to get a fully representative panel of mediators available for all mediations across the industry.
No, 100% agree, Marion. Yes, so well done.
Yeah, if I can add to that, I think there's you need to distinguish between there are two scenarios provided for in the protocol. The one is where the parties elect to appoint co-mediators. There, the parties are free to appoint whoever they agree on. Could be from different organizations. And then there's provision for, like Marion said, the capacitating and growing the cohort of mediators. There's a co-mediator and observer model provided for. That's really just for training purposes. That's at no additional costs. So to that end, it's really for the lead mediator to obtain the agreement of the parties to allow for co-mediators and observers to form part of the process. That's for training purposes, and it comes at no additional cost. Where the parties choose to appoint co-mediators, for example, I know the MEC for Health in Gauteng prefers the model of one medical practitioner and one legal practitioner. That comes at an additional cost, and of course the parties then are able to and entitled to appoint whoever they deem fit. On to answer the free agent question, currently the protocol provides for mediators to act under the auspices of, I think simply put, that's because there is no legislative framework that requires mediators to act within a framework of professional accountability. So that's the way to ensure that quarter next mediation, at least, is done under the auspices of somebody that holds their members accountable, make sure that they comply with the professional code of conduct. Because the reality is that we do have a lot of practitioners that purport themselves to be mediators without necessarily being qualified, trained, and experienced as such. It's a different skill set. It's a little bit different from just acting as a lawyer. So to that end, I think it's been done to ensure that the mediators that participate in this particular project are properly qualified and practice proper mediation, facilitative mediation, and doesn't go a little bit rogue and start adjudicating or making findings or being prejudicial or favoring one side over the other. So that's really, I think, what it's about, and that there's also a complaint system. So if you do find a mediator that violates any of these policies and codes that the members' organizations impose, then you can lay a complaint and make sure that there are consequences for that non-compliance.
Thank you so much for that, Michiel. I think that makes it very clear. Also, in as much as the free agent concept pertains, I think exactly what Michiel has said is also explained in footnote 4 on page 26 of the mediation protocol. So yes, I think if one reads that, it really clarifies the situation. I see someone asked a question on the chat about, do you only pay the 1,000 rands fee under certain circumstances? I've now scrolled past the question, but the 1,000 rands fee is all mediation administrators don't charge R1,000 fee. It is up to you as the attorney to do the necessary research to see how that is charged. Literally every administrator has a different cost structure. So you need to do research, but don't think it's R1,000 for all matters and for all administrators. I hope that clarifies your question. I think our time is almost up. Yusuf, I think we can take one more question that will take us to 14:40, if that's okay with you.
That's perfect. I'm going to read out something from Atlas, who could not get through. It says, kindly advise on the status of default judgment role. Will it remain in 2031, or will there be a separate role allocated for these matters?
So the directive explicitly says that the dates we will be receiving will not be, the waiting time for those dates will not be more than, I think it's 18 months, if I remember correctly. So what that boils down to is that we have an undertaking from the judiciary that whatever dates we get after we've gone through the mediation process and were not successful in settling will be way earlier than 2030 or 2032. At this stage, we do not know exactly what dates we will be getting, obviously. The court is still busy cleaning up the rolls, as I understand, and the proof of the pudding will be in the eating. We will keep our eye on it, and we'll see very soon where those dates end up. I also do suspect that some of the dates, the default dates that are currently in 2030, will be moved forward very soon as the administration has been done at court in relation to cleaning up the court rolls for those years in which court dates have fallen away pursuant to the directive.
Thank you kindly. Looking at our time, I think we've reached the end of our Q&A. For all those questions that have not been answered, please don't hesitate to contact either one of the GAA members, either Nicolette, who is our secretariat, alternatively any one of the members, or the chairpersons of the various organizations that you may belong to. Just as an indication, looking at the Gauteng local division, we had during May 2 different judges giving us different orders. The one confirming that in absence of compliance by the defendant, that the applicant will be deemed to have complied with paragraph 4.9.2 and 4.9.3 of the mediation protocol dated the 22nd of April 2025, whereas another judge indicated that merely did not confirm compliance with the mediation protocol. She didn't know whether she had the power and authority to do so. So that's just an example of two different judges giving us different opinions. This letter is problematic simply because if the date on trial was within a short period of time, it would mean that after 10 days, possibly the applicant would have to go back to court to try and secure the date. If any of those variances in the courts are received from any of our members, please let the GAA know, because we've had a formal meeting with the JP who's given us an undertaking that he will speak to all the respective judges to ensure that there is uniformity applied throughout in this particular process. Any problems with the SIC courts, please let us know as well. And on behalf of the Gauteng Attorneys Association at this stage, we'd just like to thank you all for your involvement and participation, in specific relation to our guests who have taken the time and effort to take us all through the required documentation and the process. From Nicolette and the team, as well as all the various chairs of the respective associations, I'd just like to say thank you, and join us in our next workshop. All the best. Keep well. Bye-bye.